Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Blue Architecture, Water, Design, and Environmental Futures by Brook Muller, narrated by Will Tulin. Publisher's note: this audiobook includes bonus material. Please visit Tantor.com and type Blue Architecture into the search box. Follow the link to the books page. Then, under the Supplemental Content section, please enter the access code FLOW, and then click the Unlock button to access the bonus material. The code should be entered in all lowercase letters. All figures referenced in this audiobook can be found in the bonus material. Preface. It was a Tuesday afternoon. It was springtime and watery in the northern hemisphere of Earth. Earth was green and watery. The air of Earth was good to breathe, as fattening as cream. The purity of the rains that fell on Earth could be tasted. The taste of purity was daintily tart. The surface of the Earth heaved and seethed in fecund restlessness. Earth was most fertile where the most death was. Kurt Vonnegut, Jr., The Sirens of Titan. I walked the streets of Portland, Oregon on an early January morning. Silent darkness envelops my world. Curling fog twists around felt globes of overhead lights. Raindrop dashes arc in the cones of passing headlights. Mist glistens on every leafy surface. The slow and ceaseless drizzle pools and brings into horizontal relief the irregularities and microtopographies of every roadway, if one is inclined to walk and to look. A narrow pool of standing water at the curb's edge blinks as the stoplight above turns red, black, red. And where the street begins to slope gently downhill, pleats of water gather as complex embroideries, backing up and roiling at the leaf-choked drain. It drizzles now, as it so often does, and yet there are times when the rains fall freely and thump in icy droplets. And it can come sideways and violently. In December 2016, to the south in nearby Eugene, where I lived for some time, a rare combination of conditions led to a massive downpour, during which the thermometer never wavered from 28 degrees. Driving my son to his after-school music lesson, I thought, this cannot be good. The warmer precipitate of the sky smacked the cold earth, and layers of ice began to accumulate on every surface. Hours later, trees started to fall, power lines came crashing down, transformer boxes exploded, cars and roofs were crushed. Tiny microclimatic changes led to a weather event that brought an entire city to a standstill for weeks. As I walk, the bright expansiveness of summer feels unimaginably remote. For in Oregon, much to the disbelief of most Californians, summers are hot and dry, and it is not uncommon for no rain to fall from June to September, during which time the sun-starved Northwesterners walk about with crazily joyous looks on their faces. While temperatures are typically in the 80s during the day, unusually hot spells have arrived the past several Julys, with daytime highs climbing to well above 100. And during the extreme dry heat of August and September 2017, the forest's extra-thick undergrowth, the result of especially intense winter snows and rains, turned to tinder and led to a flash drought condition that fed massive forest fires throughout the region. As I walk, I contemplate my personal and professional trajectory and the many privileges I have been afforded. After majoring in environmental studies and then pursuing a master's in architecture, I had the great fortune of entering the profession and working with talented, gracious designers and thinkers at Benish & Partner Architects in Stuttgart, Blackbird Architects in Santa Barbara, where, among other projects, I contributed to the design of Watershed Resources Center, and Michael Singer Studio. I realized that ideas and lessons that gathered and gained momentum during this time all flow toward water. And everywhere I travel these days, what presses upon me, hydrostatic pressure style, is how essential it is that we pay more attention to water in architectural and urban design. Water is often overly abundant, with neighborhoods subject to flooding during increasingly severe rain events, and in so many other instances there is not enough. Arguably, however, the most common condition is actually that the right kind of water is not where it should be, notes Antoine Picon, and that seems to be the case today more than ever before. Or as Michael Sturr, director of the Portland Water Bureau, claims of potable sources, there is not a shortage problem, just a maldistribution problem. Often water supplies are polluted, whether in an arid environment like Egypt, a country that depends almost exclusively on the contaminated Nile River and that has seawater encroaching upon its fertile delta, or a more verdant climate like Minnesota, where nutrient loads from agricultural runoff impact the land of 10,000 lakes, or in cities like Flint, Michigan, and Newark, New Jersey, where unacceptable levels of lead in the drinking water impair health and threaten livelihoods. And a perfect storm is gathering in the city of Jakarta, Indonesia. Water streams down from the mountains of the tropical island of Java and enters a city of many millions in polluted riverways, while a rising South Java Sea and land subsidence as a result of overpumping in order to secure decent water supplies in a context of rampant development suggest a perilous near future. What is tomorrow's water for a city like Jakarta, or Lagos, Dar es Salaam, or Seattle? How are we to work through the paradoxes of overabundance and scarcity of this most precious resource? The day brightens and traffic swells as I cross the streets of Portland's inner east side, and I think of what it has meant to dwell for 15 years in the Pacific Northwest, the upper left at the edge of darkness, sea, and the known universe, a place of great luminous and hydrological contrasts. I reflect with gratitude on the many advantages of being in the milieu that I taught in for as long as I did, a place of intellectual abundance and courageousness, as well as plentiful rains. For decades, the great pulse of the University of Oregon Architecture Department has centered on commitments to a sustainable built environment, which can happen only by rejecting the bifurcation of architectural design and building technology, such as exists in other programs where designers, with a capital D, occupy the upper strata of faculty society, and building technologists are relegated to second-class berths below. This conviction extends to the school's origins. From the beginning, it has viewed design as allied with other domains of creative inquiry and predicated on interaction with those domains, and it has maintained a corresponding disinterest in dogma for which we have little time. Introduction. To wean cities from centralized systems and all their associated problems, we might simply have to find a way to make decentralized water supply and treatment practical at higher population densities. David Sedlak, Water 4.0. Rapid urbanization, climate change, a growing population, racial and economic inequalities, and ecosystem degradation fuel our angst and suggest the value of new approaches to water infrastructures, ones that align the goals of resilience, equity, ecological responsiveness, and sufficient and suitable quality water for all. Building on this challenge, this book teases out the profound architectural and urban design consequences of emerging approaches to water supply and treatment, such as distributed systems, and considers the implications when architects engage in bringing water into the creative ambit. It endeavors to motivate a next generation of architects to embrace the complexities of water and water systems, excite the design and moral imaginary, and proactively contend with the many hydrological problems facing contemporary urban societies. A typical sequence in an architectural or urban design process may be described as architects make space, engineers add water. Water is a technical concern relegated to consultants and seldom seen as a formative agent of design expression and meaning. Adopting an alternative, more synergistic and environmentally attuned approach has profound implications for architects' design processes, fostering as it does expansive thinking about broader hydrological conditions and the synergies between site-scale sustainable architectures and resilient urban landscapes. Such an approach also motivates designers to change the kinds of collaborative relationships that they see value in cultivating, and it implies a strong systems orientation in design, one that favors the interactions of elements and cascading effects over fixed and static forms, bathed in eternal light, and a related goal that projects deliver net positive watershed impact. Are we attending to ancestral springs? Environmental justice, social injustice. As water seeps more deeply into design consciousness, we see more clearly how our configurations of buildings, cities, and infrastructures have contributed to environmental calamities and social injustices, and how responses to water challenges throughout urban history have often led unwittingly to a next generation of problems. In Nature and the Crisis of Modernity, a trenchant critique of the very idea of sustainable development, Raymond Rogers guides the reader through the successive waves of mourning to be found in literatures over the past 1,000 years, as writers have attempted to come to terms with the losses of nature and biodiversity, of relationships to nature, and of relationships to one another, that accompany the onset of new economic, technical, and social orders. Along the lines of Rogers, what follows is a lament. We are destroying the foundations of life and what sustains it. We pollute our sacred springs. We fill our wetlands. We marginalize members of our community. The frenetic narrative driving contemporary culture brings design up short and curtails our ability to imagine beyond the profitable now into the landscapes, wetlands, and welfares of the future. Communities trying to make good a little place in the world find themselves continually confronting powers that diminish their agency and ability to steward their water and other resources properly. It may be negligence, or perhaps it is cultural and infrastructural failings that put at risk the residents of Flint, agricultural communities in California's Central Valley, the people of Standing Rock unified in defending the sacredness of their waters, or the residents of Newburgh, New York, a city dependent on a source containing disconcerting levels of perfluorooctane sulfonate, a firefighting foam that spilled in 1990 from a nearby Air National Guard base. Either way, those with power and ostensibly the ability to help these communities and protect their assets would risk not safeguarding water supplies so as to move fuel or make money or economize or otherwise proceed from a very narrow definition of the problem in need of solving. It is difficult not to be maddened by a society where incentives are in place to behave selfishly and where we witness daily a sad lack of commitment and imagination in ensuring adequate protections of public health, especially in economically marginalized communities. For if we designed things properly, we would not need to burn the fuel and contaminate the water in the first place. Or, as Robert Macfarlane has said, if we attend more closely to something, then we are less likely to act selfishly toward it. A primary goal in this book is to retain a critical posture, attend more closely to urban waters, and work out the possibilities for an approach to design as a form of stewardship. While this is not a technical manual, it necessarily furnishes an outlook on the role of, and our reliance on, technology in architectural design and the making of cities. Although the book offers a lament and a critique, it is written with a profound sense of hopefulness and conviction that the potential of design to make a difference has never been greater, and that opportunities for creative leadership in the water sector abound. It takes inspiration from Dr. Alicia Cole's observation that we do not need great leaders of broken systems, we need engineers of new ones. In our use of the term Anthropocene to describe a new geohistorical era we have entered, the environmental philosopher Derek Jensen finds further evidence of our lack of critical reflection. For implicit in the notion of the Anthropocene is an assumption of the grave task of picking and choosing species worthy of saving. In this sixth mass extinction in the history of the world, humans have no choice but to play God and determine the survival prospects for non-humans, so the story goes. And yet, as Jensen suggests, never for a moment would this same species see any choices needing to be made about which technologies should be saved and which jettisoned in an era when entire biotic communities have disappeared and ecological fabrics are unraveling. These very technologies that have so heavy an impact on non-humans pervade and shape our own lives. In what he labels the device paradigm, the philosopher Albert Borgman, in his groundbreaking work Technology and the Character of Contemporary Life, describes a ubiquitous contemporary phenomenon. Technological surfaces overwhelm us and lead to merely superficial interactions with the systems and processes, devised or natural, that support our lives and lifestyles. Of the many devices that saturate our experience, he claims, what distinguishes technological life is its division into surfaces, rough or pleasant, and concrete, inaccessible substructures. The technologies and infrastructures that deliver our services, move our waters, treat our wastes, and operate our buildings, buried underground and embedded within ceiling cavities, register as only surface effects. We overlook their modes of being and ecosystemic impacts. Maria Kaika would say that the modern home, in a simultaneous act of need and denial, hosts in its guts everything it tries to keep outside. Current discourse on high-tech, sustainable architectures and smart, green cities suggests a future of ever more sophisticated veneers crowding out lives and foreclosing the possible alternative futures to be found only in the depths. The late great planning theorist Robert Young claimed that smart cities utilize technologies that allow cities to do stupid things faster. Or, as Jensen says, every time this culture invents some way to become more energy efficient, the culture doesn't use less energy, but uses that energy efficiency to produce more saleable stuff. In other words, to convert more of the living to the dead. Will a next generation of intelligent, resource-saving devices and high-tech green buildings connect us to the things that truly matter and contribute to the productivity and diversity of natural systems upon which we depend? What prospects are opened up when we proceed from a different set of design premises and corresponding technological commitments, when we attend with great care to basics such as the value of wetlands and access to clean water for all? This project builds on a University of Oregon tradition that I inherited and embraced. It privileges passive approaches to the heating, cooling, lighting, and ventilating of buildings, and rests on the conviction that rich and meaningful architectural expression follows when a project's sociability diagram, how a building's basic organization supports social life and the quality of the interactions of those who occupy it, is one and the same as its environmental response diagram, how it gathers energy and distributes heat, air, and light. We now bring water into the mix and consider how largely passive and more resilient hydrological approaches can complement other environmentally responsive, low-energy design strategies in positively shaping urban architectures. Why the machine in an era of green? We are beginning to think of democracy not in terms of an idea or an emergence of a social movement, but as the assembling of machines. Timothy Mitchell, Carbon Democracy. With an emphasis on passive design approaches and ecological integrity, why does architecture as machine, a much frowned upon idea in the contemporary era of green, make its presence felt in this book? Allow me to begin to explain by going to the source, Le Corbusier, our poet laureate architect of the 20th century. The problem of the house has not been stated. Nevertheless, there do exist standards for the dwelling house. Machinery consists in itself the factor of economy, which makes for selection. The house is a machine for living in. Le Corbusier's famous metaphorical characterization of a house as a machine heralded a staggeringly influential view of architectural impulse. You have to appreciate the audacity. For Le Corbusier, it was not foolishness to hasten forward a clearing up of things, and to affirm the radically transformative possibilities for making architecture in full acknowledgement of the forces of industry. Architects were to embrace the logic and symbolic economy of the machine in order to guide the spirit and gather the forms of the emergent age. Our external world has been enormously transformed in its outward appearance and in the use made of it, Le Corbusier observed. By reason of the machine, we have gained a new perspective and a new social life, but we have not yet adapted the house thereto. Architectural theory in the last century offers continuous commentary on the world that Le Corbusier recognized with such brazen optimism. Successive generations of architects and theorists have been compelled to weigh in on the figuration of a machine, perhaps the most influential characterization of architecture in the 20th century, and one applied to houses as well as other elements of the built environment, places for work, commerce, entertainment, and so on. Some commentators have affirmed, worked through, and extended its implications, while others have advanced other modernisms that align industrial modes of production and the machine aesthetic with traditional and/or regional and national styles and manners of building. The great Finnish architect Alvar Aalto assumed a central role in this effort to hybridize the vernacular and the modern. Still others lament the sameness brought about by the New World Order and rage against the machine. As the story goes, the creation of spare and efficient machine-like towers made of replicable parts gives city dwellers access to light and air at the expense of the heterogeneity and soul of the urban environment. The crisis of our day corresponds to the troubling effects of the built environment as an entropic machine of astonishing success in simplifying complex natural processes. We now confront the litany of environmental challenges associated with the legacy of the architectural machine: a changing climate, massive species die-offs, diminished air and water quality, and resource scarcities. We inhabit what restoration ecologists describe as novel ecosystems, those differing in composition and/or function from present and past systems as a consequence of changing species distributions, alterations through climate and land use change, and shifting values about nature and ecosystems. Many novel ecosystems, of course, are urbanized, simplified, and lacking in biological integrity. The sociologist Ulrich Beck speaks to the ways in which we wrestle today with the side effects of yesterday's success. One of the reasons that previous successes, including those that manifest in the built environment, demand wrestling with later on, is insufficient appreciation of the interdependence of the systems the designer is configuring: energy, water, information, material assemblies, and so on. An overly insular conceptualization of a system corresponds to an overly narrow definition of success and leads to conditions in which side effects are customary and externalities with detrimental impacts, environmental and otherwise, are permitted. Leadership in energy and environmental design, the Living Building Challenge, and many similar contemporary initiatives endeavor to fold these externalities into the system of design such that successes produce fewer side effects. A desirable short-circuiting occurs. Electrical energy and water, for example, are collected on-site instead of arriving via the grid or by interbasin transfer. And yet, as promising as these initiatives are, there is a lingering tendency to view the building as the boundary of the system, and therefore to undervalue potential contributions to and impacts on the parent system of which the building is a part. Thus, architects design sustainably certified buildings clad in zinc, and rain events produce runoff containing zinc particulates that devastate aquatic life downstream. Even with as laudable an example as the Living Building Challenge, the conceptual construct, the metaphor that a building is alive, may delimit emphasis on mutually beneficial transactions between a building and its surroundings. The building is attended to as that which is animated, and biological processes and life cycles occurring on the site may be de-emphasized. Swept up in the idea of biomimicry, designers may unwittingly make high-performance buildings inspired by the morphology of bugs that in aggregate hasten the decline of macroinvertebrate populations. With such thoughts in mind, it may be both reasonable and unsurprising to say that the metaphorical pole has swung too far, that the machine, the paradigmatic metaphor for modern architecture now supplanted by the organism in an era of green, is not necessarily so sinister and life-threatening. If machines are simply devices that modify and transmit force in order to produce desired effects, the question becomes, what are we asking our machines to do, and what inputs are necessary to make them run effectively, given an expanded definition of success? Lewis Mumford has suggested that once in existence, the machine tended to justify itself by silently taking over departments of life neglected in its ideology. Frederick Fritz Steiner, recognizing this onslaught on departments of life, urges us to place greater value on the many critical ecosystem services that support us and that represent an accumulated complexity of millions and millions of years of interactions of the organic and the inorganic. Astonishing rates of depletion and overconsumption need to give way, whether through concerted collective action or in the aftermath of fitful tumult, to a regenerative approach that begins with a commitment to replenishment. In the sections ahead, we will discuss specific strategies for replenishing in a systems-based, water-centric design approach. With this aim in sight, let us then retool Le Corbusier's dictum, reappropriate the terms, rewire the machine, and enlist the hard in the cause of the soft. Let us build on the modernist project, yet turn its logic on its head and seek modest and lasting solutions that help overcome inherited short-sightedness. Replenished architectural machines can become prosthetics, systems assemblies that perpetuate transactions between the organic and the inorganic in support of human needs and dramatically improved urban ecosystem function. Interacting systems can perform the work of cleansing and of increasing flood storage capacity, not that of consuming energy and producing toxic runoff. And water, the fluid medium, is what makes these systems go. The scope of this undertaking. While considering how various building water systems work and providing resources that address their technical dimensions in detail, a primary motivation is a cultural one. What is the meaning of water in contemporary society? What could it mean if designers attended to it with a greater sense of aesthetic and environmental concern? While we focus more on topics such as water supply and quality and wastewater treatment, and less on important matters such as sea level rise and impacts on coastal cities, inevitably issues related to sea level rise and climate change creep into the arguments, given the interrelatedness of urban hydrological problems. In other words, focusing on the creative potentialities of working with water, as opposed to water's destructive capabilities, is not to ignore that these impacts will command ever greater attention and incur ever greater costs. Much of the focus of this project is on cities in the American West, a region replete with warning signals of impending water crises. While many of the strategies discussed will be specific to this context, the overall design approach, in effect a hybridization of ecological infrastructure and architectural machines, translates to other locales. With this in mind, I take liberties in moving beyond the American West to consider other hydrological circumstances, recognizing water as a connective, border-dissolving medium. Finally, and as will be touched on in Chapter 1, while the focus is on building and the site, I recognize that the scale of the urban district proves in many instances to be optimal for decentralized water and wastewater systems. Yet whatever the scale and scope, the goal is to advance an integrated design process that leads to better architectures at all scales and that in aggregate strengthens the functional integrity of urban ecosystems. How this book is organized. The cyclical nature of the subject matter complicates efforts to devise an obvious linear sequence of argument. Accepting this, the chapters that follow are offered aphoristically, bringing different perspectives and scales of analysis to the task of embedding water-related concerns in the design process. As such, each can be listened to independently.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?